Hi, boys and girls. Another installment of Shade of the Moon. We're on chapter 4 today, and we begin the scene with Lisa, John, and Gabe. They're at their interview to see if Lisa is going to be able to stay a couple more years in the community. So it's Friday, May 22nd. Carrie came out of the hearing room and smiled wanly at John and Val. Come, Gabe, she said. Let's go home now. Gabe had been playing with John and was unwilling to stop. Sorry, cowboy, John said, handing him over to his nanny. I'll see you later. No, Gabe screamed. A woman had come out of the hearing room and was gesturing for John to enter. Gabe grabbed John's leg and continued screaming. He never does this, Carrie said apologetically to the woman. Grubs do lie, John thought. Gabe constantly had tantrums. Val helped pull Gabe off, and Carrie picked him up. They carried him out while John followed the woman into the hearing room. He didn't know what to expect, but he felt better seeing Tyler's father sitting behind the table with a man on one side and a woman on the other. The woman who'd escorted John picked up a Bible. Put your right hand on the Bible, she said. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? John nodded. I do. Do you swear that you will never repeat or report anything that is said in this room, so help you God? I do. Mr. Hughes smiled at him. Sit down, John, he said, turning to the people seated next to him. John Evans is a friend of my son. Because of that, I'll turn the questioning over to Mr. Delman and Miss Haverford. Remember, John, you've sworn to tell the truth. If you aren't certain about the answer to any question, don't guess. Say you don't know. Thank you, sir, John said. For the record, what is your name? Mr. Delman asked. John Evans, John said. Jonathan Mark Evans. And where do you live? In Sexton, John replied. 27 Pierce Drive. How old are you, John? Miss Haverford asked. I'm 17. What is your relationship to Miss Lisa Evans? Mr. Delman asked. She's my stepmother. And how long have you known her? Mr. Delman continued. John thought about it. He was 9 when Dad married Lisa, and he'd met her a couple of times before then. 9 years, he said. And your father is dead? Yes, sir. How did you come to live in Sexton? Mr. Delman asked. We had passes, John said. How did you come to have those passes? A friend of ours gave them to us, John said. Do you know how he came to have those passes? Mr. Delman asked. John hesitated. I was told he was given the passes by someone he knew, his friend's father, but I don't know that for a fact. Mr. Delman nodded. So you and Miss Evans and Miss Evans' son, Gabriel, moved into Sexton, he said. That's right, John said. Gabe's my half brother. When did your father die? Miss Haverford asked. 2 years ago, John said, right before we got here. So for the past 2 years, you live with Miss Evans and Gabriel, Mr. Delman said. Does anyone else live with you? No, John said. Well, our housekeeper and Gabe's nanny, and their names are Val and Carrie, John replied. I'm sorry, I don't remember their last names. Mr. Hughes smiled at him. Relax, John, he said. You're doing fine. John smiled back at him. Yes, sir, he said. This is kind of nerve-wracking. How would you describe your relationship with Miss Evans? Miss Haverford asked. Good, John said. Good, very good. Does she ever hit you? Miss Haverford asked. John laughed. No, absolutely not. Does she ever hit or spank Gabe? No, ma'am, John said. Do the domestics ever hit or spank Gabe? I don't know, John said. I'm at school, and there's after school, and I'm on the Sexton soccer team, so I'm not home very much, but I've never seen Carrie or Val hit Gabe. I know he loves both of them. Does Miss Evans go out in the evenings? Miss Haverford asked. Is she romantically involved with anyone? No, ma'am, John said. She took my dad's death pretty hard, and she doesn't have much time to spare. There's her work, and Gabe and me. Does she ever speak about her job? Mr. Delman asked. Well, I know what she does, John said, but she doesn't go into details. Does Miss Evans go to church on Sundays? Miss Haverford asked. Yes, ma'am, John said. She takes Gabe with her. I go with them when I can, but if I have a soccer game, I go to the 7 a.m. service instead. Just a couple more questions, Mr. Hughes said. Then we'll be through. Thank you, sir, John said. He hoped no one could see how much he was sweating. Does Miss Evans ever hit the domestics? Miss Haverford asked. No, ma'am, he said. Does she give the domestics an adequate amount of food? Mr. Delman asked. I guess so, John said. I mean, yes. Well, I don't eat with them, so I can't swear they're getting enough, but they seem healthy. I've never heard either of them complain. As a matter of fact, they both told me how grateful they are to work for us. Miss Haverford smiled at John. Is there anything else you'd like to tell us about Miss Evans? She asked, before we call her in for her examination. She's great, John said. She didn't have to give me the pass, but she said she wanted me to live with her, that it would be wonderful for Gabe to have a big brother, and I know she works hard at her job. I really think she should be allowed to stay in Sexton. He stopped. I hope that's okay, he said. Thank you. Thank you, John, Mr. Hughes said. You're playing in Sunday's game? Yes, sir, John said, getting up. Give him hell, Mr. Hughes said. Show him who's the boss. I'll try, sir, John said. Thank you, Mr. Delman, Miss Haverford. Their nods indicated that he could leave. John realized he was shaken. He wasn't sure what they were trying to find about Lisa. He could only hope he answered them correctly. He didn't want to think about the consequences if he hadn't. Remember the consequences if they failed this examination. They will probably both have to leave Sexton Township. I will continue on Saturday, May 23rd. I'm sorry, Mom said, as John answered the phone. I never should have talked to you that way. It's okay, John said. You were upset about your students. I understand. I'm still upset, Mom replied. Maybe even more so. Did you hear what happened to the high school? On a side note, remember, it was John and his so called friends who burned down the high school. John swallowed. Yes, he said. Destroyed, Mom said. Someone's idea of a joke. It makes me sick. But you're still teaching, John said, right? I'm trying, Mom replied. They moved us to the elementary school. The whole high school is crammed into 3 rooms. They moved the chairs and desks down, and the kids sit on the floor. It's the only way they could fit everybody in. Where's the elementary school? John asked, trying not to picture the high school as it burned down. On Maple, Mom replied. It's about a 10-block walk. Well, that's good, John said. At least you don't have that long walk anymore. It's not so unfair, Mom said. I know it's not your fault, John, but the whole system is wrong. Hey, lady, you're not the only one who wants to talk, John heard a man shout. I've got to go, Mom said. I'll talk to you next week. I love you, John. Love you too, John mumbled and hung up. They had done the right thing, he told himself. Mom wasn't there. She couldn't understand what it was like that night. On a side note, remember his friends wanted to kill the homeless person, but they changed their minds by bringing up the fact that they can go and burn the high school down instead. So basically, they they chose the lesser of the two evils, and that's why John says he had done the right thing. Let's get back to the story. Besides, what difference did a couple more years of education make to a grub? Miranda and Alex had both gone to high school, and look where they are here now. They are had to work. They all had to work to do grubs and clavers. John would finish high school and go to Sexton University to learn whatever the board thought would be the most useful to the enclave. He wouldn't have any more to say about his future than a grub. Maybe the system was wrong, but it was the only system they had. It was a system that kept them, clavers and grubs, both alive. Sunday, May 24th. It was a 3 hour bus trip to Worley, and the air was particularly foul. So it means that it smelled. It wasn't clean. The air wasn't clean. John didn't care. He played as though he were the only man on the Sexton team. He didn't just steal the ball from the Worley players, he stole it from his own teammates. He made 13 shots and 9 of them went in. Sexton won 11-2. Nice job, Evans, coach said. He hogged the ball, Tyler declared. Didn't give the rest of us a chance. Coach paused. You're right, Tyler, he said. Evans, this is a team sport. Let the grubs see who the real clavers are. It was a balancing act, John told himself. Everything was a balancing act. I did hog the ball, he said. Sorry. Just remember which side you're on, slip, Tyler said. I'll remember, John said, as though he'd ever been allowed to forget. Monday, May 25th. John was playing horsey with Gabe when the phone rang. Val answered it. "It's your mother, John," she said. John eased Gabe off his back and walked over to the phone. Mom called only on Saturdays. It was Miranda, he thought. Something bad must have happened to her. "Is everything all right?" he asked before Mom had a chance to say hello. "Everything's fine," she said. "Miranda went for the clinic for her first checkup on Sunday, and it turns out a friend of yours works there, Sarah Goldman. Her father's the doctor." "I know," John said. "I had this idea," Mom declared. "I'll invite Sarah and her father, and you, of course, for dinner. They could come over from the clinic, and you could take the bus in with Miranda and Alex. Nothing fancy. What do you think?" John thought it was a terrible idea, but he knew better than to say no. "Sarah's father's very busy," he said. "He probably wants to go right home at night." "Well, we won't know until we ask," Mom said. "So why don't you ask Sarah? Find out what day would be best for her and her father. One day next week? You can tell me on Saturday." "Can you afford it?" John asked. "Food's not cheap, Mom." "I know what food costs," Mom said. "Better than you. And yes, we can afford it. John and Sarah are all right." "All right," John said. "I'll talk to you on Saturday. Have a good week, honey," Mom said. "I love you. I love you too," John said. He did love her, he told himself. She was his mother. She'd starved for him. So why did he dread the idea of Sarah meeting her? Tuesday, May 26th. John woke up at the near sunless dawn. He hated the thought of inviting Sarah and her father to Mom's apartment, not because he thought Sarah would be offended. On the contrary, he knew Sarah well enough to know what she'd say. She'd be delighted, all part of her everyone is equal attitude. But John knew better. Maybe everyone was equal, or had been before, but everybody didn't live equally. That was the way the system worked. Clavers had more because they deserved more. Grubs had only as much as they needed to survive because their survival was important, not essential. The way Claver survival was, but important enough to justify their being fed and sheltered. Grubs could be replaced easily enough. Clavers, except for Zachary's granddad, were irreplaceable. Julie should have been the slip. That had been the plan. He'd be the grub, working in a factory most likely, maybe even the mines, if Sarah had met him, and there'd be no reason why she wouldn't have looked twice at him. For all her talk about everyone being equal, she was a clever girl, and clever girls never look twice at grubs. But it didn't happen that way. He lived in Sexton on Julie's Pass. Julie, who had died because of him. On a side note, he keeps on blaming himself for Julie's death. I guess as the novel unfolds, we are going to get the real story of Julie's death and why it bothers John. Let's get back to the story. He tried to fall back asleep, but it was impossible. Instead, he got dressed and stared out the window until he knew it was time for Val to be making him his breakfast. "I guess I should thank you," he said, sitting down at the table. Val had already poured him a glass of goat's milk, and he took a sip. "For what?" she asked as she scrambled his eggs. "For not telling the board how I make you get up early," he said. "You didn't tell them that, did you?" "I didn't," Val replied. "But you don't have to thank me. Around here, it's better to keep your mouth shut." She served John his eggs, two slices of potato bread toast, and a small bowl of strawberries. A clever breakfast. Sarah was probably eating pretty much the same in her kitchen. He didn't want to think about Mom's breakfast or Miranda or Alex's. What did Val and Carrie have for breakfast? He'd shared a house with them for 2 years and had never seen them eat. Had he ever been told their last names? "Why aren't you eating?" Val asked. "Is there something wrong with the eggs?" "No," John said, taking a mouthful to prove it. "I was just thinking. Are you from Sexton, Val?" "What makes you ask that?" she replied. "Just curious," he said. "I'm from Nevada," she said. "My grandmother lived in Las Vegas," John said. "We didn't know what happened to her." "I go out early," Val said. "My boyfriend was a geologist. We were out of there by the end of May." She paused. "4 years ago," she said. "It feels more like 4 decades." "Were you domestic?" John asked. Val laughed. "I was an assistant professor of philosophy," she said. "Not a lot of jobs for philosophy professors these days." But your boyfriend must be okay, John said. Geologists were selected. Does he live in Sexton? He died from the flu, Val said. We're in a AVAC camp. I kept going east because I didn't know what else to do. Then I heard there were jobs around here. They like domestics to be college educated. Carrie was a marriage counselor before. Do you mind being a grub? John asked, picking at the strawberries. I mind the term, Val said. It's offensive. But everyone calls you that, John said. Why be offended? Everyone can call you ugly, Val said. That doesn't mean that you can't be offended. John stared at her. Val burst out laughing. I'm sorry, she said. You're not ugly, John. You're a nice kid, and you're nice looking, and I don't know how we got to the subject. Eat your breakfast and don't think so much. John took a bite of his eggs. He'd wait until tomorrow to invite Sarah. He'd had enough socializing with Grubbs for one day without having to hear Sarah go on and on about everybody was equal. Wednesday, May 27th. Sarah wouldn't stop talking on the way to the bus stop. The clinic was understaffed. It was impossible to give the people the care they needed. There were children with rickets. Did John know what caused rickets? A lack of calcium and sunlight. People in Saxon took vitamin pills and calcium supplements and drank goat's milk while children in White Birch had rickets. Do you drink goat's milk? John asked. Do you take your vitamins? Sarah scowled. Daddy makes me, she said. And does he drink goat's milk? John continued. Does he take vitamins? He has to, Sarah said. He's the only doctor for all the people in White Birch. It's important for him to stay healthy. Exactly, John said. That's why Clavers get goat's milk and vitamins. It's more important for us to stay healthy than it is for grubs. I hate you, John Evans, Sarah said. Somehow, it didn't seem like the right time to invite her to dinner. On a side note, I want you guys to think about John's character at this point. I don't know what he's thinking. He feels like that he's above the rest of the crowd, especially the grubs. However, he's not a Claver himself. He's a slip. So I want you guys to see how this character is going to evolve throughout the novel. Let's get back to the novel. Thursday, May 28th. Sarah was unusually quiet that morning, and John took advantage by inviting her and father to dinner at his mother's. He had to know by Saturday, and waiting until Friday was too risky. My mother says you met my sister Miranda at the clinic, he began. You never told me. I can't talk about patients, Sarah said, but I wanted to tell you I liked her a lot. She's so proud of you. She is? John asked. It hadn't occurred to him that Miranda thought about him at all. She couldn't stop talking about you, Sarah said. How you're great with Gabe and so good at soccer, how brave you've been, living with Lisa and not with your mother. She paused. I never think about it, what it must be like for you. I'd hate it if I had to live apart from my father. I'm sorry, John. I always tell you you drive me crazy, which is particularly every day, but I don't give you enough credit for who you are, what you go through. It's okay, John said. I talk to Mom every week, and sometimes I see Alex when he's driving the bus I'm on. Besides, they want me to be here. It was their choice. Miranda insisted I take the pass, Julie's pass, he thought. What would Julie have wanted? Still Sarah said. She reached over, turning John so he was facing her, and then she kissed him. John held her on to her, trying not to think of Julie. He dated a few clever girls and enjoyed himself with plenty of Grover girls. He never thought about Julie, what he'd done to Julie when he was with any of them. Only Sarah, because Sarah was the only girl he'd ever cared about, the only one other than Julie. Listen, he said, breaking away, my mother wants you to come to dinner any day you want. You and your father. I'll be there. Ask your father, okay? He expected Sarah to look pleased, not just because it would give her a chance to go slumming, but because it was his family and he was important to her. Instead, Sarah looked doubtful. I don't know, she said. What do you mean, I don't know? John said. We're not good enough for you. No, of course not, Sarah said. I mean, of course you are. You know what I mean. It's wonderful your mother wants to have us for dinner, but Daddy hasn't done anything since Mother died except move her and work. It's been less than 4 months, John. It feels like forever, but it really hasn't been that long. It's just dinner, John asked. He asked the ask him, okay? Mom will kill me if I don't. Sarah laughed. I'll ask him, she said, and she kissed John again. I'd love to meet your mother. I'll let you know tomorrow, I promise. Promise, John said, and kissed her. But in the distance he could hear Julie crying, no! Daddy says yes, Sarah said as soon as she saw John. He thinks it's a wonderful idea. Monday, all right? We'll go straight from the clinic to your mother's. Monday, John said. I'll tell Mom when she calls tomorrow. He tried to feel happy, but all he could think of was Mom's miserable apartment. Sarah's home, Zach's grandfather's home, was a 10-room Victorian with a wraparound porch, a greenhouse, and 3 domestics. Sarah might bandage grubs, but she'd never eaten with one. It won't be fancy, he said. It doesn't have to be, Sarah replied. It's family. Saturday, May 30th. John knocked on Val's door. What is it, John? She said. I'm leaving for the bus in a minute. I know, John said, handing her 2 books. I took these out of the library. They're philosophy books. I thought maybe you'd like to read them. Val looked at the books over. Aristotle, she said. William James. That's quite the combination. The library didn't have much of a philosophy section, John replied. I know we keep you pretty busy, but I thought you could read them before you went to bed. You can keep them as long as you want. The library works on an honor system. That's very sweet of you, John, Val said. Thank you, I appreciate it. Well, you want to keep your hand in, John said, so when you're looking for philosophy professors again, you'll be ready. Any day now, Val said. Thank you, John. I'll start reading them Monday night. But now I got to go to run if I want to catch the bus to White Birch. It was funny, John thought. Monday night he'll be in White Birch. He didn't think that all the philosophy in the world would make the evening any easier. End of chapter. Very interesting chapter. Um, Sarah's dad and John's mom are going to meet. Let's see how they hit it off. I just want to also remind you guys that John's mother's ex boyfriend was a doctor as well. Remember, he died in the hospital helping the patients. All right, so I hope you guys enjoyed this chapter, and I'll see you guys in chapter 5.